Ediga forave. Igu bloiko, rusula ruju. Holaka holala, halagu
Howdy, welcome back to another riveting episode of Film And. We are now in our 5th season. Welcome back. You know what's up. I am Dan. Thank you for joining us. It is another beautiful sunny day here in Burlington, Vermont, in the Champlain Wave Studios. And I am excited to bring to the table yet another tier list. Our running segment of taking either a director or an actor's filmography and kind of putting it in a tier list. And, if you've been listening to the show for a while, if you're a fan, I think this isn't something new. But I'm really excited because I actually have a couple tier lists coming up this season and hopefully next season as well. It'll just be a good time being able to do deep dives into these actors and directors' careers and really kind of look at their progression and just see what they've done and the impact it's had on the world of cinema. So today we are going to be discussing the directorial efforts of one Agnes Varda, which is a director I've been wanting to see more of her works of since maybe 2 years now, and I'm glad I gave myself the excuse to do a deep dive. Agnes Varda, she has so many films. She has her shorts, her documentaries, but I really want to focus on her full-length feature film narrative pictures. That's what we're talking about. And Agnes Varda, in fact, has 12 of those, spanning from the mid-50s to about the mid-90s, which I find really interesting that in the final leg of her career, her last 2 decades, she didn't direct a narrative feature film. Her final one was 1001 Nights, I believe in 1995, and that was it. But the thing is, she didn't stop. She continued to be a big part of just the film community for another 20 years until her death in 2019. And I found that really interesting. But she has these 12 films that we will be talking about. And pretty quickly, when I was prepping for this episode, I realized I can't really do it justice by talking about these 12 movies in this short period of time. So I figured out I have an open slot coming up in a couple weeks where I can actually place a second part to this episode where I will be talking about the second leg of Agnes Varda's cinema directorial career. So today we are actually only talking about her first 5 movies, and that is going to be 1955 to 1969, spanning 14 years. And I really feel like it's a very interesting leg of her career. Obviously, I would argue maybe one of the more iconic ones because she is kind of considered the mother of the French New Wave, the left bank movement, all these amazing movements going on in France at the time, experimenting with cinema and narrative and just capturing these absolutely beautiful visuals, which I think is what attracts a lot of film cinema people to French New Wave, is just the staggering visuals that were brought forth in this experimental age, primarily in the 60s. But I think what's really cool is at points I really feel like Agnes Varda isn't only just a precursor to that, but one of the greatest examples of, having this picturesque cinema exist, and also telling pretty unique stories at the time, being able to just have her own aesthetic and go off and just create something truly herself. And as we go into these films, I think you will realize that she is one of a kind, and she always will be. So yeah, to start it off, obviously the tier list format, if you don't know already, is broken into 6 categories. From bottom to top, T, U, V, W, X, Y. A T tier, which rarely comes up in in film is terrible. T is for terrible. The U tier is unfortunate, unfavorable, movies that weren't absolutely garbage, but like, it wasn't one of the high points of a director's or actor's career, either like a weak, weird performance or just like a less coherent statement from a director. V, we start to get into V meaning very average. So like just good old movies, good old films directed or acted in. Next up, W, worth a watch, something that just kind of puts it above very average, like that little extra something that can be a really interesting like touchstone in someone's career, in their progression, whether that kind of is hinting towards something they would do in the future or just a really interesting outlying experience for them. And then next up, X for exquisite. X marks the spot. Just really a solid picture, both I think critically well received, personally well received, something you can't really miss in this person's filmography. And then obviously the Y tier, the top of the game, Y for Yabba Dabba Doo. You can't really escape the Y tier films. They're just amazing. They're just great, not only for personal enjoyment, but also just for what this film or performance did for the greater world of cinema. So let's get on into it. We're talking Agnes Varda tier list. And of course, we're starting off with her directorial debut, 1955's La Pointe Courte. Yeah, boy, what a movie. It's good. It's I think for a directorial debut, I think it's a really amazing statement. And this is actually a point where I feel like Agnes Varda is on the cutting edge of the French New Wave. I mean, this film in production in 1954, released 1955, just an amazing artistic statement that was really only hearkening what was to come in the left bank movement that she was a part of and just French New Wave in general. Coming in 1955, which feels earlier than I think a lot of the major films and other directors would eventually get to in the late 50s and really like hitting their stride in the early 60s, which is where also Agnes Varda, her next film, you'll see, lands dead smack in the middle of that. But really there's this, from the first frame of La Pointe Courte, there's this beauty and forward-thinking just aura around us that Varda has. And it's just really feels like a moment of ushering in the new wave. These first couple of revolutionaries who are doing truly unique things, and you have to respect it so much. And what's cool is that, La Pointe Courte really there's this immediate tension and slow impending feeling just as you go in. And essentially the story is there's this married couple that comes back to the husband's seaside hometown, and they kind of suss out their relationship, considering whether they want to separate, leave each other, or stay together. After the wife was spending a couple days in Paris away for the city and just coming back with all these doubts. And this is kind of painted over this backdrop of the husband's seaside town, which is interesting that he doesn't really have many interactions with, but this is kind of like the B-plot of the seaside town kind of battling the health department and the overall kind of federal government of France that's basically placing these really heavy restrictions that is just kind of curbing their financial success, and they're trying to really continue to save their hometown through this overbearing control of the outside world, the government. And you just have these two stories kind of intertwining in various scenes that feel almost like just these vignettes of moments together, especially with the married couple. And the entire time there's this intrigue, there's this mystery and there's this tension, at least going off before you really know what's coming, and like what the story's about, that like there's these mysterious individuals, like health department workers, just hanging around waiting to muscle in on the fishermen who are like fishing in illegal waters because, they want to make money and support their family. But yeah, I mean, beautifully shot. It's spatially smooth and methodical throughout the entire thing. And there's this excessive use of dolly of dolly shots, just tracking shots through the dirt streets of this hometown and along the shoreline that just really gives it such a slow, washy feeling in a sense, you know? Like you're just slowly moving along. It's very graceful. It gives it such a graceful feeling to the film, which I absolutely love. And at times it really does feel like, you know, there's that classic new wave melodrama there for you, you know? It almost feels like a comedic romantic farce at times, because the dialogues that Varda has in between this married couple is so dramatic and so altsy-faltsy. It's like, it's hard to handle at points, you know? But I think, I mean, despite some of these more cringy moments, Varda pulls off a really riveting experience of like a seaside town in the 50s and capturing France and love and life in a small rural town. And that is why I gotta give it, well, it's difficult, you know, because like I really usually like giving tiers after I've seen all the films of a director's oeuvre, you know, of a director's filmography, and then I can kind of see based on their personal spectrum whether it gets a certain tier. But based off of, I think, these five, I think I gotta give it a V tier. You know, at the end of the day, it is a very average, it's a somewhat average outing of cinema for Agnes Varda, but it still will stand as her directorial debut, and always an interesting one at that. So there's plenty of little nuggets of beautiful new wave cinema to catch in this one if you're interested. But moving on, we have the next film, 1962's Cleo from 5 to 7. Easily, I think, this is kind of, you know, undeniable. This is considered her greatest work of the French New Wave. This comes 1962, the height of the French New Wave itself. And I love making this comparison because I was watching these back to back, and after listening to the wife character of La Pointe-Courte talk about the busy, crazy life of Paris, I feel like that very dialogue is brought to life in Cleo from 5 to 7, which, if you don't know it, is about a famous model, actress, celebrity, popular figure in France at the time, played by Corinne Marchand. And it essentially captures 2 hours of her life as she basically receives this ominous tarot card reading with this iconic color film intro at the beginning before it switches completely to black and white for the rest of the film. Basically, she's wandering around Paris waiting to hear back from her doctors about potentially a disastrous checkup that she had. It is implied that she may have cancer, but she's unsure. No one knows. She's just living in this unknown state of mind. And with all of this building up, I think it ends up being a really interesting kind of internal monologue compared to how she's realized in the external physical world. But yeah, this is one I gotta say it. This is a Y tier. This is a yabba dabba doo. Yeah. It's you can't really beat Cleo from 5 to 7. It's truly something else. It is a magical cinema experience and captures so well, I think, a lot of these not only like feminist themes of womanhood and capturing the social gaze of France in the 60s, but also the idea of just, I don't know, reflection and depiction of oneself, both to themselves and outwards. How do you portray yourself, and how do people receive that? And what do you do with how people receive it? This endless cyclical nature of a social interaction, you know? So obviously a dynamic, exciting look at Paris in the early 60s. Scenes stitched together in quick, sequential order, these like 12 to 16, again, vignettes of like 3 to 4 minutes at a time. And just kind of discussing the public and unrelenting existence of someone in the public eye. Loads of inner monologue and contemplation that just honestly create these textured, fascinating characters. Because something Varda does is she has a lot of the inner monologues voiceover when we're looking at them. And it's not just Cleo. It's not just the protagonist. It's the people around her, the people who notice her. And I think Varda does this to such a good effect that it creates so much more textured, interesting characters that it really just allows you to fall into the world in a really cool way. It's a strong contradiction to, I think, the peaceful, airy country life on the southwestern coasts of France that we see in La Pointe Court. And perhaps maybe this feels like a bit of a sister film, as it feels like this is the setting that is talked about as the opposite of what you see in La Pointe Court. And I really like making that parallel because it feels like every time there's kind of a progression of what Varda is kind of doing with her films and how she wants to, well, maybe not subvert audience expectations, but, bring the audience member into something new if that audience member knows her previous work. Obviously, these heavy-handed allusions to reflection and beauty to be seen by self versus others. And just, oh God, there's just magic in every frame. There's never an inch of film wasted, I swear. Even just driving around the city, you just see all these reflections. You see people's eyes in the rearview mirrors. You see objects moving and turning and twisting, and people just making the frame as exciting as possible. And honestly, upon a second watch, I was really amazed at the amount of detail that went into the film. And yeah, it's a Y tier. What can you do? It's just fantastic. And one thing I do want to kind of leave Cleo from 5 to 7 on is that, this takes place on the first day of summer, a nice, hot, exciting city day in Paris in the summer. And I was watching an interview with Varda talking about Cleo de 5 et 7, which is 5 to 7. And in French, 5 et 7, 5 to 7, actually has a different meaning. That back in the day, it was kind of a meaning of afternoon, like love meetings. 5 to 7 is when you would have these meetings with either a paramour or just close friends or some kind of romantic contextualization of that golden hour of the afternoon. And I think that is such an interesting way to characterize Cleo, and it kind of changes the whole character for me, considering this entire film in a romantic lens, seeing how she is this object of beauty and to be something to aspire to in some sense, and how that just informs every social interaction she has. And it is just kind of this deconstruction of your traditional romantic beauty. And I think that's just so fascinating, which is something I think Varda does quite a bit because, she tackles so many feminist themes, and she really likes putting women at the forefront and kind of expanding their stories in the best way, which is why I think she sticks out so much in the French New Wave because, who else was doing that, and who else was doing it at the quality, at the professional level that Varda was at the time, with such creativity and artistry into these just beautiful looks of womanhood. So yeah, Y tier, yabba dabba doo. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will be discussing the final 3 films of this first leg of Agnes Varda's career in the Varda tier list.
Running late to class but still need that morning caffeine or hot breakfast to start your day out right? Download the Bite app by Sodexo and place your custom order for fast, easy pickup at Zyme. Open 8:30 a.m. to 3 o'clock p.m. Mondays through Fridays.
All right, and we're back. We have now discussed Varda's first 2 films. We're moving on to the next 3. And we are starting off with a slapper, folks. We're talking about Le Bonheur, also known as Happiness, 1965. Her kind of follow-up to Cleo from 5 to 7. These films come in very quick succession at this point. She has 4 films of the 60s, and we'll get to the other 2 in a minute. But essentially, Bonheur is a story about a married couple with a child living this idyllic, beautiful life until little by little things start to break apart. I feel like it's at this point that Varda has really zeroed in on a narrative visual storytelling, being able to lead the viewer's eye to a much smoother motion through her editing and shot choices. And this comes through so well on Le Bonheur that it feels like, she spent this film really trying to tell the story through the visuals in a way that she hadn't done before, and it really comes through. One of the things I think you noticed right away is she used a 35 millimeter Argentine color stock, which captures the images in this bright, I don't know, Technicolor-esque beauty. I mean, bright colors abound here. I'm not kidding. This thing is so bright. And that also comes through in the costume and set design. Just bright colors. And La Bonheur, happiness, honestly, at the beginning, it almost feels like a parody, you know, of like how sunshiny everything is, the bright clothes everyone is wearing on a sunny day, a trip to the park with kids. And it's crazy because, I mean, it's so bright and everyone is so happy, but this is where that kind of classic Varda twist comes in, that sort of tension and looming where you don't know what's going to happen, but something's a bit off. And I think there's an expectation the audience has, or maybe that's just me, but you can feel it. There's this palpable sense. And what's cool is that Varda doesn't even do anything. She barely even shows that, other than in like some slow, impending dolly shots, and sometimes just the musical choice, which can be kind of interesting. But you feel like there's this impending something throughout the film, even though she never overtly shows it. And that really is just such a testament to Varda as a director. But yeah, I feel like this is such a fascinating examination of, I guess, an individual's existence in a paradise, you know, or a state of bliss, you know, and the tension for the audience when there is none for the characters. Yet we're just waiting for things to fall apart, but everyone just seems okay with everything. And I feel like, God, Varda must have only cast people with like the most beautiful smiles and gorgeous lyrical voices. It feels like such a celebration of life until the end, until it isn't. Because the tension Varda is able to create, even with the most simple things, builds up to just this really quick 3 minutes, almost only 3 minutes in the entire film, where it kind of doesn't live up to its name, Le Bonheur, happiness. You know, it is a relatively happy movie the entire time. We see this final scene, in the final scenes, spoiler right here, if you want a spoiler on this semi-obscure Agnes Varda film from the 60s, you've had time to watch it. Or pause this and go watch it. I don't know. But essentially, the last couple of scenes mirrors the first couple of scenes so well, except it is recontextualized so differently that we understand why there's this reflection of the beginning and the end. Things have changed, but really only for the audience, which is so fascinating. So for this, I gotta give it a W. Worth a watch. Really interesting touchdown, because it does feel like such a departure from these other kind of overly dramatic and overly serious French New Wave films at the time. But don't worry, folks. If you were missing that, we come right back around in 1966's The Creatures, Les Creatures. Coming just 1 year after La Bonheur, the first thing to notice is Varda's foray into widescreen cinematography, with the film being shot at like 2.35:1 aspect ratio. So we already know this is going to be a widescreen, beautiful, pastoral experience. But man, this is really Varda returning to her new wave roots after kind of doing a really cool departure in La Bonheur. But it's even more dramatic and edgy, you know? From the first scene, it is already just new territory being broken for Varda. You know, playing with time-lapse, aerial shots, and an overall higher budget, I imagine. I mean, the realism of her past work has kind of taken the back seat in this one, I feel like, a little. And it's just, I don't know, it's this exciting roller coaster ride for that very fact, you know? I mean, you never really know what's going to happen, because I'm going to say it, there were like sci-fi themes in this film. This is like kind of like a sci-fi film. Well, not kind of, it totally is. But like, you know, Varda's version of a sci-fi film, you know? It's just this unsettling tension in an already upfront way with the musical choices, and that continues with the visuals. Essentially, the story is husband and wife driving along, and they live in a seaside town, which sounds a bit familiar, but it's different. Trust me, it's different. They get in a car accident. The wife loses her voice, and the husband, well, he kind of loses a step, I think. You know, he's a bit more just untrustworthy of everything, and he has this like guilt over him of getting his wife in a car accident, who was like in the opening scene telling him to, hey, slow down, and he's like, nah, I'm fine, and then they crash, obviously, and he has this weird skull right in the middle of his forehead the whole movie. But essentially, the seaside town they live in starts to be torn apart by a mysterious force. But the protagonist, the husband, the writer, learns the secret of the town and tries his best to curb this mysterious force that is tearing everyone apart. And boy, it's interesting. You know, it has these random dialogues of artsy romances, poetic statements on love and life, but it's recontextualized in the protagonist's writing. You know, we see scenes of his novels that he works on because he's a writer throughout the film, but it's sometimes even hard to tell what's his story and what are just scenes from life, and just given creative liberty through Varda's lens. But it is this really interesting kind of dense cinematic experience that you can try your best to parcel out, oh, what is he just thinking about and what is he actually doing? But yeah, there's some really fun and crazy scenes. You know, the lead, Piccoli, has a conversation with a horse and a bunny. He beats his neighbors with a dead cat. And these beautiful, like, monochrome, colorful cutscenes that unfold in just, a surprising sci-fi thriller narrative, which I was not expecting from Agnes Varda. And I'll say it, the ending of this film confuses me to no end. To this day, I could watch that movie 3 more times, and I will not get that ending. And yeah, so I guess I would put this one at a W tier as well. Easily worth a watch. Mostly for just being such a unique departure for Varda, you know? Next up, our final film of this episode, we are talking about Lions, Love, and Lies, 1969. This is Agnes Varda's first English language film. Takes place in Hollywood, the late 60s, and it is truly, I think, the most experimental piece I've seen so far. Granted, I have not seen the next couple of films, the 7 or 8 I have left, but this is something else. I think it's a fascinating, intimate look at the late 60s in America, but man, I will be honest, Lions, Love, and Lies, the scenes, they're long and drawn out, they're bizarre and often unflattering, but it's respectably capturing 60s culture, meshing this kind of underground film movements of New York at the time, but set in the film aesthetics of Hollywood. This beautiful, sunshiny Garden of Eden, which I think is an aesthetic she herself addresses throughout the film. It borders on documentary at times. It has a very loose, open storyline. It feels like just days in the lives of the 3 kind of main protagonists that live together. A good summation comes really at the 20-minute mark when one of the lead actresses says, it's different. We're looking for something else, which I think this is what Varda was looking for when trying to make this film. Not only going to the Americas, but making something truly different from the rest of the stuff she'd made. Feeling much more inspirations from, I think, live theater. You know, I think that's something that really comes through. I gotta say, I'm not a huge fan of this one. This is a very bizarre film, and I've seen the late 60s in America captured in, I think, better in other films of the time. But, I mean, it is unlike anything I've ever seen. I'll give it that. I feel like it often, like, radically places the audience in varying positions of perspective, which is easily one of the best parts of this film. Because, I mean, you have characters that ignore the camera, sometimes they interact with the camera, they address it from the point of view of another character, they even talk to Agnes Varda asking, will this ruin the shot if I walk in? And sometimes to a very eerie lack of response. You don't really hear Agnes Varda's voice, which is kind of cool and unsettling, but that's just kind of my own interpretation of it. But yeah, it's I am bewildered at what I've watched with this one. This is crazy. I'm afraid to make comparisons sometimes. I'm afraid to like bottle this movie into something else, because with a movie so experimental, it is so open to interpretation. And how can I say like, oh yeah, this is what it is? But I mean, for me, it feels like a documentary, maybe about like a bunch of flower child theater majors that are just way into themselves, just prancing around the set of a Wes Anderson film. I don't know. So at the end of the day, I feel like I gotta give it the U tier. You know, it's a bit unfavorable. you know, if you're really deep into Varda, if you really want to experience something different, I think this offers some cool stuff. Just capturing an aesthetic, a time in America that, I think has been told in better lenses. So yeah, I guess that's it. We're ending off on those 5. It's a crazy weekend watching all of those. Can't believe I found time for them all, but I did. I mean, I'll be honest, I was going to do all of them, all 12 movies this weekend, and oh my goodness, I don't think I could have done that. I would have torn my hair out, and I wouldn't have slept last night trying to do all those. So I'm happy I've decided to turn this into a 2-parter, but you will be hearing the second part of my Agnes Varda tier list, a couple weeks from now, 3 or 4 weeks, I don't know when specifically, but down the road, definitely before Halloween, I think. But, you know, as always, yeah, thank you so much for listening. That is it for this week. We will be back next week with another returning segment. This week, a decade ago, we're going to be talking about The Dream House, starring Daniel Craig and others. So, yeah, have a good rest of your week, night, and you'll be hearing from me next week. Goodbye.